he was certainly outspent. Polls indicated that he might not be able to win, but I think it goes back to traditional politics and doing a ground game where he really built a voter contact system that worked in his favor and got out there, turnout models, talked to voters. And I think he has to replicate that and expand that for a general election to see himself be successful.
In the United States, November's midterm elections are getting ever closer, but Democrats are still fighting over what direction the party should take. Some say the soul of the party. But there have been some significant victories for so-called democratic socialists. Last week in Michigan, Abdul El-Sayed defeated the centrist Congresswoman Haley Stevens by just a whisker, setting up a contest between him and Mike Rogers of the Republicans in November. Here he is making his victory statement.
If you believe, like me, that we have a responsibility to stand up and walk with our unions so that everybody has collective bargaining rights in this country, if you believe, like me, that you ought to have the guarantee of good health care in this country without some corporation trying to tell you what you cannot have and should not fight for, I hope that you'll join this movement now.
Certainly the Palestine-Israel issue featured prominently, and Stevens, for example, had the backing of the Democratic leadership in Washington, and she also received $32 million from AIPAC, the pro-Israel lobby. But she lost. So is democratic socialism rising in America, and how will that influence the midterm elections in 2028? Let's speak to Amy Dacey, the former chief executive of the Democratic National Committee. Hello to you.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I hope you are too. Now, what do you see, if you do, as being the significance of the victory in Michigan by Abdul El-Sayed?
Well, I do think that we're seeing some, candidates in various places that are doing well because they're not necessarily establishment candidates. A lot of them are saying that they are, trying to run on a message that they think things can be done better. They think that things are not happening, with current members, people who have been in the system. So I think you saw in Michigan, too, Abdul really running a campaign that talked about it's not working. Here are some things that can be done better, and reaching out to to voters in that manner.
It's been pointed out by a listener that the victorious candidate is not formally a member of the Democratic Socialist Alliance. Does that make any difference? Is he a Democratic Socialist?
No, I mean, listen, I think it's how people affiliate, certainly. And in one way, certainly to look at it, in the U.S., there isn't a Democratic Socialist line at all. I mean, there is it's very, they can affiliate or say they're a part of a certain wing of a party. It's how he decides to affiliate. Some of them will say that. There's a history in parties in the U.S. of having, we've had the Tea Party candidates on the Republican side, or there's this movement, there's MAGA Republicans. That's not how it appears on the party line. It's just how they seem to affiliate. There was Blue Dog Democrats back in the 90s who seemed to be more conservative. I think that there's definitely people who are on the more progressive liberal wing of the party, and some of them are saying this rise of democratic socialists. It's how they decide to affiliate. Even Anastasia Cortez, Congresswoman, she appears as a Democrat, on this. She runs as a Democrat. So that's the way the system works here in the States. It's, I think, how candidates are presenting themselves to voters.
But does it point to a real transformation? I mean, we also had the victory of Mamdani in New York. A transformation in the Democratic Party moving away perhaps from support for Israel to more overt support for the Palestinians, something which in the state of Michigan, given its population makeup, it was felt to be quite significant in the defeat of Joe Biden.
It's certainly an issue that's still going to be prevalent, I think, in this midterm election. I do think you saw, in our elections last year in 2025, though, more moderate candidates winning in governor's races in New Jersey and Virginia. So there are places where, candidates who seem more liberal or like with Mondami in New York. Now, certainly Abdul won in the primary in Michigan. Whether or not he wins in the general will depend on how he talks to voters or what he says the plan is to the whole state. And that is a different place to run than certainly in New York City. So it remains to be seen, like, what he says in a general election. I still think with all these international issues as well, people are still concerned about the basic things in the United States, about the economy, about affordability, about people's ability to provide the things that they need for their families going forward. So if candidates aren't talking about that this fall, I think they're missing out on something that is the biggest concern of voters in this country. And so I think Abdul, in Michigan, candidates in congressional races and down ballot all over the country in Senate races are going to have to talk about that. They're going to have to talk about why this current administration is not getting it done, why there's mistakes being made if they're running as Democrats. Republicans will have to say, why are people better off than they have been in the past years. And so that will still be at the forefront of this election.
A big question that often faces political parties in democracies is whether they can please their activists and at the same time please a majority of the electorate to win. What's your view on that?
Well, I mean, I think it's the future of primaries in this country. I mean, the individuals who are voting in primaries and affiliating with one party are certainly becoming less and less. Absolutely. The voters that voted in a primary are more likely to be more party loyalists, more people who, want to see that. But now in the general election, these are the choices before the candidates. Abdul's going to have to talk to those people that didn't vote for him. There were several people who voted for Haley Stevens, across the state, in this primary. He's going to have to welcome them into the fold. And then he's going to have to talk to independents or people who didn't vote in the primary and make that case. So that's what he's setting out to do in a very short time. This was a late primary as well. But that is what any candidate, has to do when they get through these primaries, is then look at the general election makeup, in this midterm election and see how they're, making sure to keep the people with them that voted in the primary, but talk to those voters in an authentic way about how they're the better option going forward.
I mean, I think I'm right in saying that the polls suggested that Abdul's opponent had a better chance of winning in November.
Yeah, I think we've seen this a lot. Polls are just a snapshot or a moment in time, and they, can kind of indicate, where people are, but it's the voters, and the only poll that matters is the poll on election day. And I think that, he was certainly outspent. Polls indicated that he might not be able to win, but I think it goes back to traditional politics and doing a ground game where he really built a voter contact system that worked in his favor and got out there, turnout models, talked to voters. And I think he has to replicate that and expand that for a general election to see himself be successful.
Amy Dacey, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Times Radio.